Thanks for joining me for this series of video Bible lessons. My name is Ryan Goodwin. I work with the East Shelby Church of Christ in Collierville, Tennessee. If you'd like to reach out to me or to our congregation, you can find information at eastshelby.com. So I want to tell you up front that all of these lessons are going to be fairly short. We're going to try and keep them pretty basic because we want to try and answer the question, does God exist? It's a topic that very easily could go out into the weeds philosophically, and we don't want to make things too complicated for ourselves. So each of the lessons are going to be fairly short, and if you'd like to ask more questions or study any of these topics further, then again, reach out to us, and we'll open up our Bibles, and we'll get those questions answered. But in this series, I just want to look at the basics and introduce some of the fundamental concepts and see if we can answer the question, does God exist? Now, before we get to that question, I want to look at one that's even more fundamental, and that is, why should I even care if God exists? Now, here's the reason why I ask this question. For a long time, mankind simply looked up at the stars, the sun, and the moon, and looked at the natural world and the harvest and even his own body, and it was just very easy to give credit to something supernatural. Now, you call it God, or the pagans called it the gods and believed in this multiplicity of gods. But whatever it was, we just believed in something superstitious or supernatural. And yet here we are in the 21st century, and we don't need to believe in God anymore. Or so we think. Now, here's what I mean by this, and I'll give you a few examples. Where before we would just pray to God when we were sick or injured, and God would heal us if He wanted to, or if we would make some appeasement offering to Him and make God happy. Now we know that we're healed because of medical science. When we're sick, we take medicine. When we're injured, we go to a doctor. When we're really injured, we go to a hospital. And there's an array of technologies and medicines at our disposal. And so, why do we need God anymore? Why should I pray to God when I can go to the pharmacy and basically get whatever I need to feel better? Let me give you another example. We used to view religion as something that bound our communities together because we identified with a certain religion, because we all shared belief in the same God. Then we could build communities. We could have our villages and our tribes and build societies based on a shared and common understanding of who God is. Well, I guess we don't need that anymore, do we? Here in the 21st century, we build communities on things other than religion, God, faith. Right? We build communities based on a shared cultural background or a shared history, or because we share certain commonalities in other ways, whether it's race or ethnicity, whether it's a background of some kind, or simply because we live in the same area or work the same job or have the same interests. So why do I need God to establish a community identity when there's so many other ways to establish community identity? You know, before we understood science, before we understood what chemicals were, what molecules were, before we really had formulated an understanding of the laws of thermodynamics, we just gave God credit for everything, or the pagans gave the gods credit for everything. The reason why the sun came up is because the sun god made the sun come up. The reason why the harvest ever happened was because the God of the harvest made it happen. And yet here we are, again, in the 21st century, on the cutting edge of so many amazing discoveries, with so much technology at our disposal. If we want to change humanity, well, we have genetic engineering at our disposal. When we want to cure things, we simply figure out how to cure them. When we want to get rid of a pandemic, deal with a virus, well, we just hunker down and put our heads to it and come up with an answer. So why do I need God anymore? That's the fundamental question. Now, some people take a look at God and they just say, why do I need God? Why can't I just be a good person, for example? Why can't I just live by the golden rule, just do good deeds, be a part of my community, and just be nice to people? Isn't that good enough? Other people say, I just choose not to believe either way. I just want to be an agnostic. I'm gonna ride the fence, and I'm not going to believe one way or the other. I mean, after all, what has certainty really done for anybody? Wasn't it certainty that caused the Salem witch hunts, or the Spanish Inquisition, or the Crusades, or modern-day wars in the Middle East over religious differences? What has certainty done for us? After all, certainty just leads to conflict. So I think it's just better to ignore the question of God's existence altogether. And why can't I just be satisfied with good things in this world? Be happy in my marriage, be a good husband, be a good wife, be happy in my family, and go to activities with my kids, watch them play sports. Why can't I just revel in my career and my achievements or my good works in the community? Or maybe if you're a nihilist, you just say life is meaningless anyway, whether God exists or not. So maybe God exists. Who cares? We're all still going to die. There's still people starving to death all over the world. There's still natural disasters and catastrophes. So whether God exists or not doesn't change the fact that by all accounts, life is meaningless. And maybe you find yourself in that boat. Maybe you found yourself saying some of these same things. I find it very easy to dismiss God if you just think of God as like some old-fashioned country bumpkin, right? If God is in the classical definition, right? The classical artwork always portrays God as some like old man with a long white beard he's distant, he's way off in the heavens, he's disconnected. If you always view God as just kind of like some old bumpkin, then of course it's easy to dismiss God and to believe that he's irrelevant. Why should I care if God exists? After all, does God understand cell phones? Does God understand modern day science? Does God understand the internet? Like if you picked up a cell phone or something like that, would God be the sort of person like raises his glasses and does a cell phone like with his index finger, one button at a time? The screen is just so small. I just don't know how you people use these things. Would God know how to program like a smart TV or figure out how to like fix his internet? Does God understand cutting edge technology in medicine or communications or space exploration? I think we just see God as just this old relic from the past. And again, it's very easy to keep God in a small box and view him as irrelevant if your only picture of God is that he is irrelevant. We forget that God, however, is timeless. That as he's defined in the Bible, he's eternal. Revelation chapter 1 and verse 8. Jesus displays himself to the narrator of this book. And he describes himself in Revelation 1 as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The beginning and the end is never irrelevant. A being that is timeless and eternal is always existent, always there, always seeing everything, always with a great understanding of the times and what's going on. The basis for all of our scientific discoveries is the assurance in natural laws that are inviolable. We believe that if we design something, engineer something, fix something, we believe that it will work in a predictable manner exactly because there are inviolable laws, because of the laws of thermodynamics. Do you know why we believe in those things? These are laws that were established from the very beginning of the universe by the one who set the parameters of that same physical universe. We're only discovering things that God knew all along. Like in the book of Isaiah, in the Old Testament of your Bible, go to Isaiah chapter 45 and take a look at what it says here in Isaiah 45, verses 9 and 10. He says, "Woe to the one who quarrels with his maker, an earthenware vessel among the vessels of earth. Will the clay say to the potter, 'What are you doing?' Or the thing you are making say, 'Ah, he has no hands.' Woe to him who says to a father, 'What are you begetting?' Or to a woman, 'To what are you giving birth?'" God actually views all of our amazing discoveries as rather quaint things because they've always existed. The book of Ecclesiastes, which is probably the most philosophical book in the Bible, notes in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing that you can point to and say, see, look at that. That's new, or that's brand new. We just invented that. Actually, those things have existed from the very beginning. What about cell phones? Cell phones aren't new. Yeah, but the scientific laws that govern how and why we've created the cell phone, those laws have always been there. The materials that we've used to craft a cell phone, those materials have always been there. The capacity, the chemical capacity, the energy capacity for all of the elements that are used to make a cell phone, that's always existed. The building blocks for making a cell phone or making an airplane or making the internal combustion engine, the building blocks and the scientific laws that govern all of those things, that's always existed. We're just discovering new ways of using lithium. We're just discovering new ways of using platinum. We're just discovering new ways of harnessing the electrical energy that was already always there. And so really there's nothing you can point to and say, see this? This is new. The world is constantly changing, whether it's culture, fads, technology, our standard of living. And a lot of times all of this change just fosters like a sense of abandon, a sense of feeling lost. And so many people spend their lives shape-shifting, so to speak, from one identity to the next because they're constantly at a loss when it comes to their identity. You remember back in middle school or high school? What did you look like back in middle school? And then what did you look like your freshman year? What was your persona your freshman year? Was freshman year the goth year or was that your sophomore year? Oh, no. Sophomore year was your preppy year, right? Preppy. And then, no, junior year was the year you finally embraced the color pink, right? We shape shift. We're different people depending on the time period, depending on what the fads are. There's no certainty in what the future holds for us. What are you going to be 10 years from now? If you even exist 10 years from now. And that leaves people feeling really lost. Rather than God being irrelevant, rather than God being kind of a clueless bumpkin who doesn't know what's going on, God is the most relevant thing ever. As the world changes, I understand that the pace of life quickens. Technology has changed the way we communicate with each other. Technology has changed the way that we interact with each other. But as the pace of life quickens, the Lord provides the needed foundation for us. There's a great parable in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27 that talks about two people who each built a house. Now, one of them built his house on the sand, and the other one built his house on the rock. They built the same house. And the same storm came and hit those two houses. And the man who built his house on the sand, well, he lost his house. The destruction was great because his foundation was a shifting foundation. It was made of sand. You can't build on top of sand. You build on rock. And if you've built your life on career, if you've built your life on youth, if you've built your life on how good-looking you are, how wealthy you are, how powerful you are, if you've built your life on some kind of identity, an identity as a rock star, an identity as an economic genius, an identity as a professor, an identity as a writer, an identity as a spouse or a parent, if you've built your life on the shifting sands of this world, your life will fail eventually. It always does. As technology becomes more powerful, take nuclear weapons, for example, or cloning, genetic engineering, the dissemination of mass information, spying by Google or government. Don't worry, I didn't leave. I left my tinfoil hat at home. But as the pace of life quickens, as technology becomes more powerful, the way I see it is a supreme standard of morality, a supreme standard of right and wrong, of ethics, is actually of utmost importance. And the source of that morality, ultimately, must be a being that is outside of this realm. Otherwise, how could he have been the source of morality and ethics? You know the reason why it's important whether or not God exists? The reason why you should care whether or not God exists is because if God exists, and I say if only accommodatively because I believe that he does, God does exist. So bear with me a little foolishness here, but if God exists, you actually have meaning. You actually have purpose. You are more than just a face in a crowd. If God doesn't exist, you're just one of a few billion. One of many billion who have lived on this planet. And whoever will live on this planet. And someday, the things that you care about in this world, they'll crumble. They'll fade. They'll fall apart. You'll lose friends. You'll lose family. You'll lose career and meaning. Your accomplishments will fade away. They won't mean anything eventually. And then you'll die. And it won't have been worth anything. In the grand scheme of things, at least. But if God does exist, then you actually mean something. Being just one of billions tends to leave us with this undeniable sense of futility, and even great ones are eventually forgotten. Even the great ones. There's a few references on the screen to the book of Ecclesiastes. If you've never read Ecclesiastes, I highly recommend it. Open up your Bible, go to the Old Testament, it's about halfway through, and read Ecclesiastes. It's the story of a very, very rich man who had everything that he wanted, and then some, and couldn't shake the feeling that life was just empty if he didn't factor God into the equation. There's nothing eternal, there's nothing permanent, there's no relationship that is eternal or permanent. And even if we take some consolation in like propagating the human species, there's still no guarantee that it's going to mean anything. Your descendants may eventually be wiped out, and then what purpose did it serve? Or someday, if there is no God, someday this planet's just going to burn itself out. Our sun is just going to burn itself out, and this is going to become just a rock floating through space where life cannot be sustained. And our descendants, a million or billion years from now, if they even somehow survive the next ice age or the next hot age or the zombie apocalypse, right? They're all just going to be wiped out eventually anyway. So what good did it serve? It takes a being like the God described in the Bible, with unlimited mental capacity to intimately know each and every person. It takes a being like the God described in the Bible to know not just the important people, to rub elbows and hobnob with George Washington and Gandhi. But it takes the God of the Bible with that unlimited mental capacity to know you and to know me and every single person who has ever walked the face of the earth. The God of the Bible is the only one that satisfies those requirements. God knows more than Google. God knows more than government. God knows even more than your parents. It's a great phrase in Psalm 139 in the Old Testament. Psalm 139. And it says in verses 2 and 3, "Thou dost know when I sit down and when I rise up. Thou dost understand my thoughts from afar. Thou dost scrutinize my path and my lying down, and art intimately acquainted with all of my ways. Even before there's a word on my tongue, O God, behold, thou dost know it all." If God exists, then you actually matter. If God exists, then, like 1 John chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 says, you have an advocate who stands before the Father, who vouches for you, who speaks for you, if that advocate is in fact on your side. If God exists, then according to Romans chapter 5, at the perfect time, when we were still helpless, when we were hopeless, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, died. And he made the way of salvation possible for all of us. If God exists, then just like it says in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 15, it is a trustworthy statement deserving full acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. If God exists, and the sinner that you are, and the sinner that I am, the sinner that we've all been, Romans 3:23 says we've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory, but the sinners that we are have hope of salvation, and a firm, steadfast, meaningful, substantial hope it is. Stick around, because in our next lesson, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this question of, does God exist? As always, my friends, reach out to us if you have questions or comments, and please have a wonderful and blessed day.